Welcome to MyLife, Chassidus Applied, episode 17. Happy Lag Bomer to everyone. This is a special Lag Bomer edition, which I'd like to begin with. The big question, of course, is the relevance of Lag Bomer to our times. Being that this is MyLife, Chassidus Applied, what better time to talk about it, being that Lag Bomer is called the Matan Torah of Primus HaTorah. And Samach Vov, the Rebbe Rashbi writes this at the end of the Maim of Svartem, Tafrei Samach Vov, delivered in 1906, that Lag Bomer is the Matan Torah of Primus HaTorah. So here's not the time to discuss, or the place to discuss, the difference between Rosh Hashanah of Chassidus of Yutas Kislev and Lag Bomer, but suffice it to say, Matan Torah of Primus HaTorah is a big statement. And of course, it's because it's the Yom Helula and the Yortzeit of Rashbi, Reb Shimon Bar Yochai, the father, you can call, of Jewish mysticism, of Primus HaTorah, and of the Sefer Zohar HaKodesh, which we honor and celebrate today as he had requested us to do. So briefly, it's a mysterious day in many ways, but on one hand, you find not many specific details about Lag Bomer, but on the other, you find the type of passion and connection that the Rebbe had, the Rabbeim had, going back to the Mukabalim and Tzfas, and of course the things that take place even till this day. And all because of Rashbi's request that it should be a simcha, the day when Bechad Katiris Katarna, with one bond I bound myself and connected to God. So briefly, a relevant message to each of us. It's a beautiful sikha from the Rebbe in Likutei Sichos, volume 5, the sikha of Yud Kislev, where he speaks about the posuk Ad Hagal Hazeh, when Yaakov and Lavan, after 20 years of torture, finally part ways, and Yaakov goes back to Eretz Yisrael. So then they make a covenant, Ad Hagal Hazeh, Gal being a heap, a mound. They make a covenant that this will be the boundary between them. The word Gal is also the letters Lag, Lamed Gimel, which is Lag Bomer. And the brief explanation of the power of Lag Bomer is that in general there's a boundary, there's a schism between the inner and the outer in life. This schism is reflected in the Lavan and Yaakov, and the schism is reflected in all of our lives. The schism between, the split between materialism and spirituality, between the body and soul, between a superficial and outer material reality that we see, and that which is within. Rashbi, Mechasti Vani Erpa, he healed and created a fusion between the inner and the outer. Similar to what we say about Matan Torah of Kol HaTorah Kula, that before Matan Torah, Shavuos, we say that there was a split between the Elyonim and Tachtenim. That which was above did not come below, that which was below did not come above, and Chassidus makes a whole fuss about it. The Rebbe in so many talks, the Bitl HaGzeira, bin Elyonim and Tachtenim, that for the first time in history we were able to fuse matter and spirit and to be able to spiritualize the material world and make it a chefzer shel kedusha, turn the material world into a spiritual environment, which will be obviously consummated when Mashiach's coming. Pnimius HaTorah, the Matan Torah of Pnimius HaTorah, did this in a far more profound way, because it actually bridged the two dimensions of Torah, Nigla and Pnimius, that Rashbi did. What does it mean to us? There would be no MyLife Chassidus Applied. There'd be no application altogether of Pnimius HaTorah and inner things in the outer world without a day like Lag Bomer. So you can see Lag Bomer as the mother of all healing. It's about accessing our inner forces within us, accessing that healing, and being able to manifest it and channel it into our outer lives. So we all live in a very physical world. We don't have jobs, we have many responsibilities to make ends meet. We have the aggravations and the anxieties and the ups and downs of the vicissitudes of life. And then we have a soul. We have an inner dimension. Lag Bomer is a day that allows us to bridge the two. Because usually they're very difficult to bridge when you're busy in Wall Street or in the rush hour or in some other type of material activity. It's very difficult to maintain vision and maintain perspective, because then you're occupied, preoccupied, overwhelmed. Lag Bomer helps us bridge the schism and bridge the two worlds of Pnimius and Chitzenius. So that, in the overall sense, is the essence of what Lag Bomer is. One of many messages, obviously. And it's about being able to access your inner faculties, your inner strengths, and expressing them in this outer world. More specifically, I want to speak about one particular thing, which is actually a question that has come in. More than one question. It's one of the sad, unfortunate phenomenons of life, is the issue of infertility. So to read one of the questions is this. I've heard all your Chassidus Applied classes, and I was wondering, what does Chassidus say to people who are not blessed with physical children yet? We live in a community where it's the norm to get married, and within the first or second year, a baby is born. Many have children, many children, and 10 children, 15 children. We were not yet blessed, and it's very hard, especially when many of my friends and family are Baruch Hashem blessed. There isn't really any support system. People are too uncomfortable to deal with this topic and not sure how to approach another. Am I allowed to be mad at Hashem? Is it after all in His power when He blesses a union? It is after all in His power when He blesses a union with a healthy child. So, firstly, as always, we have to express compassion and empathy. Anyone in a given situation like this, children is one of the greatest blessings, if not the greatest. And it definitely needs God's blessing, because you can have a husband and wife where everything is healthy, and yet if the blessing doesn't manifest, God forbid, unfortunately a child may not be born. The Rebbe's did not have physical children. Many great people in history did not. So, but it's nevertheless a great blessing, and therefore anyone that has to deal with this, I would say that you definitely have to find support, and there is support. It's true it may not be in the streets, but there are people who've gone through this, and there are support groups, and I would definitely advise you finding others that you can talk to. At the same time, maintain the bitachon, complete trust and faith in God, that He will send you a child, and never give up. You know, we know the Mesiras Nefesh, the Chana. We read on Rosh Hashanah, on the Haftarah, Chana's Mesiras Nefesh, to have a son, a child, and then she was blessed with Shmuel, and so on. So the idea to never give up is a clear Torah approach, a Chassidic approach as well, to know that we do whatever is possible. Now, after the fact, as I've discussed many times, if God chooses, God forbid, for whatever reason, I don't even want to mention it, that's another story. But as long as you're in an age where it's possible, do not give up. Every child comes at its right time. And know that when God wants to send a child, He'll send the soul. And then it will be a beautiful simcha. And we have miracles, people having children after 15 years, 20 years. Now, why do I connect it to Lag BaOmer? Just to give it more strength, is, the Hayom Yom and the famous stories of the Mittler Rebbe would go out on Lag BaOmer into the field and fulfilled, and it says that he did miracles, especially regarding children. So there's a sikha from the Rebbe, from the early years. It's also printed now. Later, the Rebbe spoke about it in Tov Shem Vov, 1986. It's printed in the Hisofis of Chelik Lamed Zayin, I believe. Likutei Sichos is the Sikha of Lag BaOmer Tov Shem Vov, where in the footnotes he elaborates why Lag BaOmer is so much connected to children. The parades we do, the other celebrations, we take children out. He even talks about the custom that children take a keshes, a bow and arrow, they play with a bow and arrow in the parks. And among the things that he mentions there is this Mittler Rebbe story, but bases it on the Medrash that the Rashbi was Peiked HaKoros. Peiked HaKoros, just like Hashem, the Medrash says, is able to be Peiked HaKoros. As we know, the Imais, our matriarchs, found it difficult to have children. And God is Peiked HaKoros, means He remembers the barren ones, the infertile ones, and opens up their wombs, which is what Hannah was praying for. Same thing with Sarah, same thing with Rivka, same thing with Rachel. So you have, for some reason, maybe great people, sometimes it's a great neshamas to get them through into this material world is a very narrow channel, and it's sometimes difficult. But Hashem is Peiked HaKoros. He remembers, just like it says, Hashem Poked Sarah, which is that same Haftarah. When we read Chana, we read the Torah, we read Hashem remembers Sarah. And Poked has many meanings. It also includes counting, but it also includes love, remembering, and so on. The bottom line is that Rashbi, the Medrash says, was also Peiked HaKoros. So the Rebbe connects Lag BaOmer. Now why? What's the connection to Lag BaOmer and Rashbi? Because, as I mentioned, Rashbi was able to bridge the schism, that when there's a disconnect between a soul above and a body below, as the Zohar says, that when there's a sacred union between husband and wife, it always creates new souls. Even when it's not blessed that soul come down to earth, which explains why there's a mitzvah for a husband and wife to be together, and even when they're together, when they know they cannot have children, or it's after childbearing age, there's still a yichud creates a new neshama. The Zohar talks about Sarah and Avram even before Yitzchak was born. So definitely, when it's blessed to be able to have a physical child, that's obviously the ultimate. And that's what Rashbi was able to do. That for whatever reason, there may be a block, there may be a channel closed, there may be some type of dissonance and inconsistency between the neshama above and coming down to a body. So he was Pekad HaKodesh, the man who would be able to bridge Primis HaTeira and Nigla HaTeira, the body and soul of Teira. The outer and the inner also bridge life in the same way. So life was able to manifest itself in a physical way. And the Mittler Rebbe did miracles in this regard. And there are also stories of the Rebbe on Lag Baimer. People who are especially in this situation would go for brachas. And thank God some are fulfilled, some are not. Sometimes God says no, and sometimes it's a challenge that we don't understand. But as I said before, we maintain our betachon. And that's the connection to Lag Baimer. Whether it's allowed to be mad at Hashem, look, I do not believe it's my job to judge anyone, because you don't judge someone until you're in their shoes. Sometimes things are infuriating and really painful. And I don't know if the word mad is, yes, it's good to challenge Hashem, I would say. Maybe mad is not exactly the right word I would use, but it's to challenge Hashem. And remember, everything has a reason and a purpose. You continue to pray, you continue to do whatever has to be done. Today there are also, thank God, medically new interventions that were not possible, that are halachically permissible. And this too should be run by Rabbanim and so on, because some things people do are not permissible. To do things that are halachically permissible and to do everything, whatever it takes to have a child. That's the way we look at it, and keep our hope there, especially on Lag Baimer when those channels open up and we get those blessings more than usual. There's a beautiful sikh in Lag Baimer, Tovshin Mem, the year 1980. It was a parade that year as well. It was the 30th year of the Rebbe's leadership. So I advise everyone to read that sikh where the Rebbe speaks at length the medrash of Rashbi. Briefly, what he says there is the famous story that Rashbi, they came to Rashbi, there was a husband and a wife who after 10 years did not have children. So al pi halacha, there's the issue of divorce. There's no children. Whether you have to or you could, that's a separate discussion. But the bottom line is they came to Rashbi for advice. Rashbi gave a strange piece of advice. The Rebbe said, what did he say to them? He said, just like when you entered in the marriage it was with a simcha, same thing here. If you want to do this after 10 years, separate ways, do it also with a simcha. The whole simcha, with drinking, with the whole l'chaims and everything. And the Medrash Barichas, the Rebbe didn't tell the whole story, but he told enough of it, which was pretty uncommon. And he said, as the Medrash says, that what happened was, that's what they did. They made a big party, and the husband got himself a good shikar. The Rebbe used the Lashenas there from the Medrashim, from the Medrash, this Medrash, and other Medrashim on the topic. He got so good shikar, he's in a very good mood. So he tells his wife that since we're going to be partying, let me offer you to take anything you want from our home that can remain with you forever. It was a gift. It was a gesture, a benevolent gesture. So she made a decision what it should be. So she told the servants that when the evening is over and the party is over, they should make sure to deliver her husband to her parents' house. That's the gift she wants. When he finally woke up from his stupor, from his in being inebriated, he became sober. He said, "Where am I?" They said, "You're in your wife's parents' home." He says, "What am I doing here?" And he said, "Well, you had told your wife that you have," or maybe she told it to him. She could take one gift, and she took it. It wasn't an item, it wasn't an article, it wasn't a piece of jewelry or piece of furniture. It was him. This was Rashbi's Eitzah. And the Rebbe connected to the Pekad HaKodesh because the Medrash concludes that Rashbi was Pekad HaKodesh. And what happened next? They came back to Rashbi, did not want to get divorced, and then Rashbi gave them a bracha, and they had a child. The whole other discussion which the Rebbe did not touch on. Why did it have to wait 10 years? If he could have given the bracha, why does he have to have this whole Aveda? But it could very well be that sometimes people have to cry out with deeper pain and cry from the depths of their heart, and then a bracha that Rashbi gives could help the situation. And maybe it required this level of simcha, the level of love that he was able to offer to his wife, this gift, and she was wise enough to choose him. So that was called the Hishtadlus. Maybe B'derech Hefsher you can explain why it came after this story. But you learn much from this type of stories, because it means that love, not only love, willpower can conquer more than we ever imagined. And we should never underestimate that. They have out there today, there's things called the power of attraction. There's and so kind of gimmicks and tricks. Some things are just commercial. But let's not remember, the Torah and Chassidus are the originator of this concept. Trach gut v'zayin gut. As the Tzemach Tzedek said to somebody who was in a situation of a family member was not well, that means kipshute in the whole sikh and chelik chavav from the Rebbe, Kutei Sichos, where he means literally. It's not just a nice euphemism, a nice cliche. Think good, it'll be good. When you think good, you open up new channels. The expression goes, the way the neurons are fired, that's how they get wired. Similar to the story with the Frierdiker Rebbe and Yankel Katz from Chicago. Frierdiker Rebbe asked him for Hagdosha, a dedication to dedicate, I believe, the Tzemach Tzedek's Sfarim, or some said maybe it's Deichemed, I'm not positive, so I'm sure there'll be people who can correct me. And he did not have the money. So the Frierdiker Rebbe told him that when you make a achlata to do something good, God opens up new tzoneiros, new channels. And he did it, and the bracha helped, his commitment helped rather, and actually new channels were opened up, as the Frierdiker Rebbe had said. What is the meaning behind this? It's not necessarily the Ma'ila min HaTeva. It means that when you make a commitment, the commitment itself opens up channels. Whereas if you don't have that betachon, you don't have that trust, so it's like thinking, you don't have that confidence, then you get what you expect. Sometimes our expectations is what actually happens to us. So there's more complicated than we would think how we actually, our brain waves and our patterns and our neurons can actually change reality. Now, I don't mean change reality in a childish and juvenile and ridiculous way that you imagine that you'll have a jaguar in your driveway, a jaguar will suddenly appear. I'm not going to commercialize it. But attitudes, positive attitudes and commitment, and you fighting for something more, brings new openings. It's a given. It brings new openings. And you can never know what kind of things can come from that type of drive, persistence, tenacity, perhaps the right word. So, Rashbi epitomized that idea, the tenacity in his entire life, especially in regarding Pekad HaKodesh, opening up these channels. Which is why we read it on Rosh Hashanah. When new channels are opened up, we can cry for Min HaMeitzer Karasi Ka, Anani B'Merchav Ka, etc. So that's the sikh the Rebbe speaks there in the Be'emer Tov Shemem. Beautiful sikh. But I want to segue this into another question that has come in. And it's also related to this topic in a very interesting way. This is a question regarding, again, parents and children, but in this case, once we have children, I just want to conclude before I go on. So again, I give you a blessing, I give everyone a blessing. Birchas Hedjit, that a day like Lag BaOmer today should open up these new channels, the schus of Rashbi, Mittel Rebbe, all the Rabbeim, the Rebbe, and the schus of the activities we do, B'simchas, and celebrating Rashbi's Yom Elula, that should open up the channels. They should have a child, Bonachayim Ezener Revicha, quickly and easily, a healthy child, many children, and the same thing with everyone out there, whoever is in need of such a blessing. This is the day that opens up channels. And we should all be there for each other, especially in these type of painful moments where people have these challenges, because it's one of the most the loneliest things. As a man, it's hard for me to imagine what a woman goes through. So it's good to have support of women that have gone through something like this, or who have seen it through and have been blessed. Never to give up, and don't allow your negative attitude, as sad as it may be, to control your life. You have to introduce into your life positivity, because that alone opens channels. The Rebbe once wrote to someone in a letter about this matter, that when you feel negative, it closes, it's constricting. Negative attitudes constrict. Who wants to be around someone that's negative? They give off bad vibes. So the same thing, blessings don't manifest when there's no simcha. Now, it's hard to be b'simcha when you have a challenge. That's why you need betachon, and believe that God sends blessings, and that every channel can be opened, and even channels, as I said, new channels. And it's very much our attitude has a big factor. I wouldn't be surprised to say that just like different attitudes generate different chemicals in our bodies, it could very well be positive attitudes also open up fertility channels, perhaps, in our physical body as well. We all know the mysteries of infertility and fertility. The greatest doctors will tell you that it's full of mystery. We continuously discover new things. There's, yes, many advancements, but at the end of the day, it is ultimately a mystery. So attitudes definitely have impact as well. Now I want to move on. That sikh in Lag BaOmer Tov Shemem touches another issue, which is quote-unquote infertility of a different sort. And you'll see in a moment what I mean. So here's the question that has been asked to me among different versions of it, but here's one to paraphrase. One version: to what degree do we blame the parents for the sort of person the child becomes? What was the Rebbe's view regarding our responsibility for our children's behavior? Do we beat ourselves up over our children's lifestyle choices? What happens in the case where we provide a good chinuch and upbringing? Should we feel guilty? The message seems to be a parent's job and responsibility never stops. Please shed some light about bearing the burden. A guilty parent. Essentially, the issue is that we have children of different types. Some children grow up the way we planned it, even though that's also not so common. It means planned it. But let's put it this way, children, there's no particular anomalies. But then children sometimes grow up in a way, and there are things that happen, their choices, that let's say what they call, I don't have the right word because in Chabad world it's hard to translate it, but let's say people who have right now do not appear to be Shemer Torah mitzvahs begoli. I say begoli because we never know what's going on beneath the surface, and even people who look on the surface one way, we never know what's happening on the other end of things. So children that we have difficulties with, they say today, ein bayis beloy, a family, a home, where the child is not embracing what the child was taught. Let's put it that way. Sometimes these children are living in our homes and they infuriate the parents. Parents don't know what to do. Should they just ignore it and just show unconditional love? Should they reprimand? Should they create strong boundaries and laws and discipline? And if the child doesn't listen, throw the child out of the home? That's another extreme. Something in between. What's the attitude? And what do you do? And what happens if it's not just a stage? You see time passes and the child has chosen turning into an adult to behave in ways that you're not proud of. What's the attitude? And how much is the responsibility of the parent, and how much guilt is a factor, and shame, and so on? So let me address it. Why am I addressing it? Because the Sikh of Lag Ba'emer, Tov Shemem, that talks about Pekut HaKoros, interestingly, at the end of that talk, the Rebbe goes on and says that there's another sort of akar, another sort of infertility, when parents and children don't get along. So there's a schism between parents and children, physically healthy children, but it's akara because there's not a seamless relationship between the two. And the Rebbe says Rashbi and Lag Ba'emer helps that as well. And he concludes there that it should be a bracha v'heshav leivavos albonim. Children should help bring the hearts back of their parents. And obviously, faket, there he may be talking in that direction, but it goes in both directions. And he definitely equates it to Pekut HaKoros. He clearly says that it's another form of a disconnect. Obviously, it's not the physical form, but it's a psychological form of disconnect. And connects it to Lag Ba'emer. So Lag Ba'emer clearly has a power to deal with this as well. Obviously, Lag Ba'emer alone is a power, but we need to do something on our own. So how do we address this issue? Well, let me begin with this little anecdote and story that I heard, that the Rebbe once told a father, he was in Yechidus, and he was crying about his son who had left Yiddishkeit, quote unquote. Again, I qualify my words because there's no word to express it. The Rebbe did not like to say that someone left Yiddishkeit. He once told George Rohr by dollars, he said that he runs a beginner's minyan. And the Rebbe said, what? A beginner's minyan. The Rebbe again said, what? What do you mean beginner's minyan? No Jew is a beginner. He's a Ben Avram, Yitzchak, Yaakov, Bas Sarah, Rivka, Rachel, Aleah. What kind of beginner is that? So it's very difficult to find words. To say someone left Yiddishkeit, we know that Rambam paskins that every Jew always wants to do Torah mitzvahs. The end of chapter 2 in Hilchos Gerish. Afal Pishachot Yisrael. So I want to apologize if I use the wrong expression. And, we could say le'esata on the external level. And it looks like this person may not be doing everything we think they should be doing. Without getting into whether we're doing what we should be doing. But let's, for argument's sake, that's what we're discussing here. So there was a father, he was crying about his child, that Nebuch felt that was away from the Yiddishkeit that he grew up with. And he was crying, and the Rebbe was consoling him. And then he says to the Rebbe, there's an American expression in America, that says the apple doesn't fall far from the tree. What bothers him most is that the apple, his child, doesn't fall far from the tree, the father. Meaning that he's at fault, basically, in some way. And the Rebbe looked at him and responded and says, yes, it's a true pisgum, it's a true statement. However, that's when regular winds are blowing. Ruches mitzuyas. Hein blosen winden, wir sein ruches she'enem mitzuyas. Hein blosen ruches she'enem mitzuyas. Today they're blowing our winds that are not regular winds. Gale winds, storms, I'm explaining. Winds that will take an apple a lot farther from the tree. So what the Rebbe is basically saying is guilt is not the way to go here. And to say that I'm at fault, obviously we are all not perfect human beings. Parents try their best in educating their children. Some make big mistakes. We all make our mistakes. At the same time, sometimes we do, everything seems right, and still the child makes choices that may not be exactly that we find pleasing to us. Choices that we're Meiser Nefesh, our personal Meiser Nefesh, not to do. So it's critical, I believe, based on this story. Why would the Rebbe tell him this? What was he trying to say to him? That you were a perfect mechanech, you didn't make mistakes? That Rebbe didn't say that. He said that you have to remember, in addition to what you did, there's also winds that are blowing that are not in your control. And that's definitely not to be guilty about. In general, we know that guilt is not a Jewish approach to things. Even though there's the stereotypes of the Jewish guilt and mothers that make us guilty, etc. I don't know where the basis of it is. It's even hard to find a true word in Torah that's called guilt. You know, there's chamola, there's guilt, there's words, but if you look in Tanya, and we discussed this in earlier episodes, the whole idea of feeling guilt that demoralizes you, feeling anxiety or anxious or depressed, atzvus, as he calls it there, that demoralizes you, comes from the Yetzer Hara. It's the best way to weaken you. Your resolve, your tenacity, your ability to fight when you feel weak, when you feel you can't fight. And he goes there in Tanya, a whole discussion how simcha is necessary, even when you're dealing with a challenge, either through seeing the deeper good or understanding that goof of the challenge is what God wants. So to have guilt, let's apply it now to our children, who does it help? You could even argue that it's about self-obsession. You're obsessing with your own feelings. Your guilt, your shame, your pride, how others see you, and so on. Is this what's good for your child? This is, again, you're focusing on yourself. And I want to be very sensitive here. I'm the last person who wants to criticize a parent for feeling sad about a child that is not the way they are proud of. But you have to, at the end of the day, if you want to do something about it, it's important to know, are you focusing on you and how you feel about your child, or about your child and what the child needs? This doesn't mean that you have to necessarily agree with your child's choices. But if the focus and the obsession is on your guilt and shame, you're going to end up wallowing in your needs, not your child's needs. I heard from a few parents who once went to Dr. Tversky from Pittsburgh, who had children at risk. Children who got stuck in drugs and other stuff that is lo yaleinu. And he told them, he had a big garbage can in front of his door before the parents came in for the meeting, for the session. And he said, here's this big garbage can. It's an empty garbage can. I want you all to throw your guilt and shame into this garbage can. His whole point was, it's not about you. So we're talking now after the fact. Obviously, when you have children that are 5, 6 years old, or 10 years old, and you still have control over their chinuch and their education, and you see them behaving in different ways, and you do whatever you can to change that. You're still in your control. But after the fact, you're talking about a 17-year-old, a 20-year-old, a 30-year-old, whatever the age is. You can agonize. Obviously, parents will have sleepless nights. But at the end of the day, the most important thing is you have to figure out is not to let yourself get in the way, including your shame and your guilt. Because that is not a tayelis. What are you going to tell your child? I feel guilty and I'm ashamed of you, and therefore you should become better. Now, obviously, I don't think any parent is going to say that. But even if you don't say it, that's what's driving you. So it's critical to dig deeper, find a deeper way to relate to this child, even if it's something you don't like. And love is necessary all the time. This does not mean that there isn't elements of discipline, but listen, at the end of the day, someone that's 25, 30 years old, you don't have control to discipline anymore. It's one thing, it's a deterrent when you're younger. Which gets into the whole discussion of the Rebbe's attitude to, even, God forbid, I don't even want to mention, intermarriage or other challenges like that. The Rebbe felt, never burn all your bridges. Because there'll be the day that the parent and child, a child has only one set of parents. There'll be the day where the child will need a parent, and if you burn the bridge, child may not have that parent to go to. This does not mean you have to agree. This doesn't mean you just acquiesce. This doesn't mean you just smile, everything is great. There are many ways, healthy and deliberate ways, that are thought through, not out of anger, not out of guilt, not out of shame, not out of your emotions, that you can express your discontent, you can express your disapproval of choices and so on. But love is always there. You're the parent. You'll always be your child's parent. Biologically, emotionally, and so on and so forth. So I don't have a black and white approach in every case, as I always point out in these episodes. Case by case, every parent is different, every child is different. So it'd be not wise to go ahead and say, here's one size fits all, here's a sweeping approach. So I'm talking about basic principles. The story with the Rebbe and the apple, I think, is tremendous in insight into not allowing yourself to become focused on yourself and your guilt, because that's a big one. People don't even want to admit, we don't even know how guilty we often feel about things and how that guilt shapes us. The guilt, you start going back. I did this in my life. This sin, this iniquity, this mistake, and you start saying, I wish I didn't do it. If I had not done that mistake, then maybe this would not have happened. Maybe my child saw me do something that was inconsistent. Maybe I was too aggressive. Maybe I was too lenient. I mean, you can go back in a flashback in your life, like a film, and obsess the rest of your life with anything you did or didn't do right and wrong. This has no teyelis for whom? First of all, you can't change the clock. You can't go back and change it. If it was a fact, so this is the whole point in Tanya of you can't allow yourself the impulse control of not allowing yourself to wallow in that type of the guilt, which doesn't bring anyone benefit. I heard a word, I've never seen it published. If anybody knows it printed, please send us a message, send me an email. The Baal Shem Tov once said, Rishoyim Meleim Charotis. So in Tanya Perikir Aleph, he has his explanation of Rishoyim Meleim Charotis. Rishoyim Lashon Rabim, Rosh Sheina Gomer, Rosh V'Tevle, because they at least have regrets, where Rosh V'Raleh doesn't even have regrets. It's only Makiv. The Baal Shem Tov Taich Rishoyim Meleim Charotis, why? Because they don't believe Rishoyim in Hashgacha Pratis. So therefore they dwell on guilt. After the fact, you have to look at the situation. This is the matzav, and the situation, and what do you do about it? So, first of all, eliminating your so-called culpability is critical here. Now, you may be culpable. That's not the point. Let's take the Geras HaKedesh, Simcha Aleph, a little step into this. Let's apply it here. Here it talks about anger. Ala nizik kvar nigzer min hashamayim. You as a parent, maybe this is what had to happen to you. That's still the reya b'chirasei of the child choosing something inappropriate. He's accountable for that. Now, of course, here it gets more complicated because you're a parent. We're responsible for this child. And maybe the responsibility is your entire life. But then the day is also about b'chira. It doesn't say anywhere that a child becomes an adult. His choice is based on the parents. As a matter of fact, bar mitzvah, we make baruch shepatrani and bas mitzvah because that's the time they begin to assume responsibility for themselves. Yes, you have deep impact. Obviously, an abusive parent who's done real abuse has a lot to do tshuva for and has to repair a lot, and that should be qualified here because that may be a factor too. If that's the case, then yes, your responsibility is, however, you can't turn the clock back, but you can make amends, go to therapy, figure out what to do with an abusive background. If that's the case. But that is a rarity, and I don't want to address that because that's a whole different story. Let's go back to a more regular situation where, as parents, we did good things. Sometimes we made mistakes and so on, and the child didn't grow up the way we wanted, or even ways that were real trouble. I mentioned drugs, alcohol, le'aleinu, no one should ever know. So the bottom line is the following. What happened. Now you have a new scenario. Now there's the reya b'chira and the ala nizik. Maybe as a parent, God for some reason wants you to go through such a thing. You have to figure out how. But to turn it into anger or guilt it's the opposite of the whole point in Tanya. Well, who does that benefit? How does that achieve anything? That's self-consuming, consuming with yourself. So in the final discussion in this episode, I'll definitely discuss this more in future episodes. The Poikad HaKodesh that Rebbe talks about is that we have the power to reach our children in deeper ways when there's a challenge like this, a crisis. And you need a Poikad HaKodesh. Yeah, you need a new channel. Now, if you're going to focus on the guilt and the negative, you're probably not going to open up new channels. As I said before, negative attitudes bring the constricted channels. That's what anger does. It constricts things. That's what being upset does, guilt does, and so on. You need to find new openings. Sometimes you need to consult with a person, maybe find something, an opportunity for your child. This child may be an adult child. You have to find something new, fresh air. Because stale air is just going to give you the stale results, the same results. So I plan to talk about this some more. I wanted to talk about it in the context of Lag BaOmer. With that said, again, I want to bless everyone to have Pekad HaKaras on this level as well. Should be a total unity between Ovis and Bonim, Imois and Bonis, fathers and mothers and their children, in the most beautiful way. In Lag BaOmer, when we celebrate the child, we celebrate the inner child, that both adults and adult children should rethink their lives and remember that life is once, and the opportunities you have with your parents, I say this now to children, are very profound. Even if you've, for whatever reason, have decided that you'd like to take a different path, the love to your parents and the parents to children should never be severed. You have to find ways to communicate, not turn this into a war and with collateral damage that's far worse than the initial disagreements. And if there are true grievances, find someone to speak to. Like many children will say, parents, I can't speak to them. They've done all kinds of things. They keep on doing things that are absolutely opposite of being helpful. I'm very angry at them. So I say to anyone that's have that situation, now you're an adult. Figure it out. You can't just use your parents as scapegoats. And to parents, a similar approach. You cannot just dwell on the past. You have to focus on the positive and how to grow and how to find connection. I know it's easier said than done. That's why I'm saying case by case. But let's suffice to Lag BaOmer a blessing that should work out in the best possible way and discover deeper strengths in our children and realize that every child, even when they go on a different trajectory, has beautiful elements. Discover what they are. And sometimes that will spill back. Discover a hobby, something they're good at. To just focus on the things that you disagree with tends to exacerbate the situation and definitely doesn't create a channel of communication. Find something that you can admire and you can celebrate in your child, even if the child is not living up to the rest of what you expect. Because as I said before, it's not about you, it's about the child. And you start building on the things that you find that are common, things that you can embrace, things that you can love that are beautiful. Whether it's a talent that the child has, whether it's the people they know, whether the child, the good midas, etc., etc. These are things that you hold on to and you build on that. And yes, it's an opportunity. God maybe is telling you, maybe look at your Yiddishkeit in a broader way and don't be so narrow the way you just saw it. This doesn't mean that you're justifying that child's behavior. It means that for you, on you have to perhaps open up your perspectives and learn to be more embracing, more approaching, and so on. This is not a contradiction, as I said, to standards. This is not becoming liberal suddenly and becoming soft on matters. It means that sometimes some of us get so locked into our way of seeing things that in this case you may be right, the way you see things. But in other cases, your akshanas of seeing a thing a certain way may be wrong. And this is maybe a way that spills over to wake you up that God is telling you, you know something? Here you may be right, but there's some things that you may not be so right, and it's important to have bittul like that. I'm not speaking for God, so I'm not saying that's the reason, but it's one of the approaches of Allah Nizik, like Yosef, how he looked at himself and he did not blame his brothers. He saw it at the end of the day as something that Hashem sent. We have to find a way to deal with it in a deeper way. And God should bless, as I said, Pekad HaKaras on all levels. Let's move on. I'd like to move on now is to a follow-up to discussions of the previous episode. And I can tell you I got plenty of emails, plenty of comments, not all positive, some critical. And we do not shy away, obviously, from any of the topics. I will address the issue of maintaining the sanctity, preserving the sanctity of marital sanctity of our marriages. I'm going to talk about two aspects of this. One, the question is as follows. Preventing infidelity. Can you discuss ways to avoid contacts to begin with that eventually lead to unfaithfulness? A second questioner writes, thank you for all the insightful and informative episodes. This past episode, you addressed the topic of infidelity and what a person could do if Chas v'Shalom such a thing occurs. What, however, should and should not be done from a preventive standpoint? Is it wrong to conclude that at times such things occur because of friendships with other couples that may have gone too far, or perhaps being a bit too cordial with a spouse's good friend, Where do you draw the line between being polite and cordial and going too far? For example, achnosas orchim, guests. Again, viewer discretion advised. Maybe I should have said that before I read the question, but never too late. Okay, so first of all, I want to make a big statement here. When I talk about these topics that are very painful and difficult and obviously tragic, I want to make it clear that even though there are quite a good number of questions that come in, it's quite clear that this is an anomaly. I don't want to give anyone the impression that this is just common, happening everywhere. I don't know the statistics out in the world. I definitely don't know them in the Jewish world. I'd like to believe, and I definitely do believe, that, and I know personally hundreds and hundreds of people that have beautiful relationships, and these are not issues. They're not even temptations. I address them because they happen to be a reality on the ground. But we should never think that this is some type of common thing. There was a questioner that asked me and said, you made a statement that you do not think that everybody's doing it is an excuse. I didn't say everybody's doing it. I was saying there are psychologists and therapists that suggest to people, don't take it so to heart if you experience some type of betrayal, because everyone's doing it. I absolutely don't think everyone's doing it. Definitely not the case. But that's also not an answer. Because even if you're going to say, oh, you know what, I know someone else that had this situation, since when is that the way we justify our lives? That was my point. So I just want to qualify this very important qualification. And this isn't just about this topic, about other topics. We talked about other sensitive matters, etc., etc. Not always talking about positive things here, always some negative. Negative is I'm addressing an issue. But let's make it very loud and clear that there are hundreds, thousands, tens of thousands of beautiful homes that where you don't have abuse, where you don't have unfaithfulness, where you have sanctity. And those are the models that we should be aspiring to and admiring. But obviously, no one's going to ask a question, I have a sacred marriage, everything is going well, what do you have to say to me? You know, when things are going well, thank God, we don't usually ask questions. We're usually not bothered. Even then, we still need maintenance. I mean, good is best, and is best. We always have to grow. So the questions amplify, obviously, a problem. But let's make it clear. A problem is a problem. That makes an anomaly, and it's not necessarily the norm. I want to say that because I don't want to give the impression that we're lowering the standards, that's like some type of thing that everybody is involved in all kinds of tragic situations. It's not even close to that. Everything here, from my point of view, is an exception. The questions are coming in from people who are dealing with this. And if there are people who are dealing with it that have not written, hopefully the words here can help. So let's talk about preventive measures. So first of all, like when the Rebbe speaks about the mezuzah with a helmet is a preventive measure to protect the head from wounds and injuries. But it's not a guarantee. And same thing with marriage, same thing in life. Things happen that as much as you prepare, you can't always prepare for everything. Yet at the same time, a vigilance and not taking things for granted is critical. A marriage is a dynamic experience. The famous story with the Ragachover and Rab Chaim Brisker, where they talked about the chiddush of chasana being a pul and imshachas. Ragachover chachsach and a pul and imshachas means it's a perpetual act. You do it once, but every moment it's being renewed. And as the Rebbe explains, when you have to bring opposites together, you constantly need renewal. Kosher k'kriyas yamsur, because water and land don't reside side by side. There's a boundary between them. Same thing with ish and ish, a husband and a wife. So Reb Chaim said to the Ragachover, Mazel Tov. What's the Mazel Tov? I was married years ago. He said, based on your chiddush, a Mazel Tov every second. Basically, it's a profound lesson in marital relations. Marriage should never be allowed to go into automatic pilot. Obviously, at times, we all have our ups and downs, and sometimes we're weaker, we need to maintain the course. Sometimes you do it without the same passion. But to let that become a habit is very unhealthy. A marriage is a dynamic experience, should be dynamic, should be renewed all the time. It's just like a havdil, I don't know if that's the right word. You have a client who's your best client, who's giving you millions of dollars of business. Start taking that person for granted. You know what's going to happen. A competitor will come right in. So you have to do is constantly cultivate them, remember their birthdays, remember and never take it for granted. It's one of the worst things that's possible can be done in a marriage. You start taking it for granted, it's just something that's regular. As we know, we know is, what do they say, that familiarity breeds contempt. I don't want to say that word, I don't like that expression, but there is something to be said when it's not b'chol yem yiyu beinecha chadoshim, when Torah is not hayem, as the Torah says. Today, fresh and new, it's like an old thing. How do we deal with old things? So the best thing possible preventive is maintaining dynamic. When you get married, make a husband and wife should make commitments of doing things together, learning together once a week, hosting something from time to time in their home, having guests, things that they stick to, because these are the things that are critical in keeping it alive. Because everyone goes back after the honeymoon, you go back to regular life. This one goes to work, this one does that, the children. And then the routines, the monotony sets in, and that's when you have the boyer reik, an empty pit, boredom, monotony, and things begin to be a breeding ground for infections. So that's number one, something dynamic. As far as boundaries, yes, there are halachas. There's some rabbis that are very, very upset about couple double dating and about the whole country scene and stuff like that. There are big problems with that. I'm not a Rav, this is not applied halacha, it's applied Chassidus. And you need to talk to Rabbanim. There are things that should be taken care of. Boundaries are boundaries. Too much familiarity is, and I'm not talking here as a prude or in some type of narrow-minded way. You have to be intelligent. But I don't believe in the surmara approach to be focusing on that we're all so susceptible. Therefore, you got to put up walls. It has to be done with love, with intelligence, in a wise way, in a mature, sophisticated way. Obviously, we go to parties, we go to Chassidus and so on. We're not talking about locking yourself up. But it has to be, I think, above all, a communication between spouses in everything. So when it comes to attack of that, talk about it. Talk about it with your spouse. Is this an appropriate party to go to? And so on and so forth. And listen, we all want to have fun in this world. Fun is great. No problem. But you have to also remember the sanctity of a marriage is the single biggest thing in your life. It doesn't just change husband and wife. It affects your children, your grandchildren, and generations to come. It's what kept our Jewish people together. Taras Mishpacha is more than just mikveh. It's sanctity of the home. The most important thing in life, shalom bayis, in the most beautiful possible way. Unfortunately, we live in a material world where our distractions with jobs and we have careers, we have other centers of activity in our lives. The home is no longer the center, has become a big problem. But never forget, your work is a means. Money is a means. And I know I could say this until I'm blue in the face. The bottom line is money is a very powerful, seductive force, as is power, as is control, as is pride, ego, and conquest, and so on. And what can I say? Chassidus Jews, learning from Chassidus, teaches you to have a little bittul and realize what really matters. Don't allow. Money happens to be one of the most powerful forces that gives a person a false sense of security. You know, a marriage is where your real security is built because that's the foundation. And yet we go and find other things that replace that. And there are problems with that as well. As soon as there's an obsession in your life that's not your home and family, rest assured that obsession opens up the door for other obsessions. That obsession may be rishus, it may not be prohibited, but it means that your focal point is no longer the center of your life, your home, family, and your mission, your shlichus in this world. Which brings me to another preventive measure. The Rebbe, without talking about it directly, indirectly said, keep busy and you stay out of trouble. We have a mission in our lives. You're a dedicated servant to the shlichus that the Rebbe gave you. And whatever shlichus that is, it's a shlichus, whether it's a formal form of shlichus, an informal, whatever that means as well. Your mission, why your neshama came down to this earth. Keep that alive and burning with challenges that you have to overcome, and not saying that's a burden and I just focus on my business and my money. That's another preventive measure. Focusing on what the mission is, the shlichus is. You know, I know once a year, Yom Kippur, many of us, we realign ourselves, but it lasts for how long? That is all the way. And frankly, the whole Torah mitzvahs was given for this purpose. Someone said to me, what do you need so many mitzvahs for? I said, in the world we live in, you should ask why we only have 613 signposts that remind us about God. We should have millions of them, based on all the distractions we have. Now, of course, 613 are physically, we can't do many of the positive mitzvahs, only 86. But the bottom line is, it's a constant reminder, whether it's Meida Ani, learning Torah, learning Chassidus. Fill your life up with positive things. It's the best preventive medicine. Offense is the best defense. It's pretty common sense. The problem is, once you fall, once you get into self-trapped, it becomes a lot more difficult. And I can go on and on with a list of things. Talk to your mashpia, talk to a rav. If you don't have one, find someone. How do you fill your life up with light, with oyer? Anan poli yamama anan. Or we are day workers. Fill your life up with light and there'll be less darkness. Ma'at If you're already in a situation like this, we've been discussing it, you have to deal with it. But don't push it under, don't minimize it. The biggest challenge, as he says in Tanya, is that you think, it's all right, no big thing, I'm still connected. No, if you've realized it severs connection and ultimately one little betrayal can lead to a bigger betrayal, that's what we have to be wary of. Okay. Now let's talk about another question, which I really want to address because this touches already on halacha. The question was, I'll read it. Infidelity, men and women. I specifically did not want to distinguish, and I'll explain in a moment why, but let me read the question now. Let me make sure I get all my documents here. Important to be all organized. Okay. In the last episode, you dealt with the problem of infidelity and forgiveness amongst the more orthodox. You made no mention of the huge difference between a wife being unfaithful, namely to become prohibited to dwell with her husband, and a husband who may have been unfaithful to his wife but may continue to live with her. I apologize for the explicit nature of the question, but I have no other way to read it. And again, I say this as an anomaly. But he continues, you discussed forgiving the slip. I don't remember saying the slip, but this is what the writer says. And again, made no mention to this important difference that a husband cannot forgive a wife who has willingly been intimate with another man, while a wife can. Well, before I even finish, it's absolutely wrong what this person is writing, but we'll get there in a moment. Of course, I realize that this is not very palatable to an audience that includes men and women, allowing for a man to be unfaithful with no consequence, while not allowing any leeway for women. Many women may not even know that if they succumb, they may become prohibited to the husband. The Torah allows for a man to have more than one wife without getting into cherem d'Rabbeinu Geshem, which does not apply to an affair. So though an unfaithful man is not an exemplary person by any stretch, what would be his bigger transgression would be the fact that he was intimate with, and he speaks about some bias asudis, which I won't get into. Another question. Actually, no, that captured a number of questions came in the same regard. So let me clarify the following. Yes, it was very deliberate of me not to address it, because this is called applied Chassidus and not applied halacha, as I mentioned. Applied Chassidus, as we know, is lefnim meshur sadin and Chassidus sheruach. Frankly, this letter repulsed me, and I'm saying it bluntly, just like the letter wrote bluntly. I'm responding bluntly as well, because it smacked to me like some type of guy that thinks he can get off the hook because halachically he found some type of distinction between husband and wife. So there's a thing called a novel b'reshus HaTeirah. A novel b'reshus HaTeirah is a despicable lowlife who does things in the name of Teirah. So just in general, someone should even write like this, to me, I have problems with. Even though I don't want to be judgmental of the writer, but I want to just say it because I've seen, unfortunately, people do that. Now let's get to the halach. Go to a Rav. For these questions, this is a Rabbana Shashayla, this isn't a Chassidus Shashayla per se. I was discussing marriage, sanctity of marriage, and how you preserve it. And frankly, from the point of view of Chassidus, there's no difference between husband and wife, because it's a betrayal either way. To start getting into loopholes of halachic loopholes can actually be destructive. Now let's go to halacha itself. Go to any Rav, a machmir, a mekel, go to the biggest machmir. This is a discussion in Shulchan Aruch, and I'll give you some Aramikemus. You go to Even Ezer in Ramah, Siman Kuf Tes Vav Siv Vav, and Siman Kuf Ayin Ches Siv Tes. Rukud Ksam Sefer, Siman Ayin Ches, Dibra Maskul Vayan. There's a famous Nedi Yehuda about this, even a disagreement between him and the Ksam Sefer. There's a Tzemach Tzedek's Shuvas, Siman Kuf Mem. And there's many more discussions. You can imagine this was not the first time it's being discussed. I intentionally did not mention any of this for a very simple reason, because I was discussing the issue on both ends, and I specifically, not because it's politically incorrect like this writer suggests. It's not palatable. Not afraid of palatable. There's a Torah and Torah Semes. As a matter of fact, if you know the reasons, it's actually not discriminatory against women. It actually shows women to be far higher level than men. I'll mention that in a minute. But to suggest that not to talk about it because it's not palatable, we're talking here about sanctity of marriage. And sanctity of marriage is betrayed whether a husband does it or a woman does it. Let's make that very clear. If you go look at the Shulchan Aruch and you talk to a Rav, and I'm telling you specifically, talk to Rabbonim about this, it is very clear that if a husband suspects a wife of something, or there's even evidence, the question of evidence is also a big question, because it's all about what's the evidence. Two witnesses have to see things that are very rare that they would have seen. So even if there's suggestibility, if there's signs, there's an email, this and that, across the board, Rabbanim will say to the husband, you don't have to believe it, you shouldn't believe it, don't investigate it, go to therapy with your wife and figure out a solution. To go ahead and go and say, no, I insist on believing in it in order to divorce, there's actually a whole din about it. Because a woman is not believed, because no person is believed to say, I did something inappropriate, because a person can't call themselves a Rasha, husband or wife. In addition, one of the main reasons with marriage, in this type of issue of unfaithfulness, because maybe this is a good excuse to get divorced because she wants to marry someone else. And the Ramah actually says the other way around too. The husband may want to believe it because he wants to marry someone else. So you see, it's far more complicated than just a black and white thing. And based on all these consensuses, you do everything possible to preserve. Now listen, if a husband and wife don't want to be married, they don't need that excuse. They can say, I just don't want to be married. But to use this as an excuse is absolutely wrong. And that's why I addressed it, that you have to do whatever is possible. It's not a slip, it's a major betrayal on anyone's part. And if a woman, God forbid, she knows in her heart what she did is her thing, but a marriage is more sacred than anything. And that's why you look at the Rambam. Even though there's Hilchos Shaita that talks about a husband who suspects his wife and the whole thing that Torah suggests, but that's only the time of the Beis HaMikdash, not today, etc. And even then, there's all kinds of conditions. The Rambam does bring one thing from Shaita. You know where? The end of the laws of Chanukah. So he talks about if you have money only for Shabbos Chanukah, it's Shabbos Chanukah, and you can only light one candle. Should it be a Shabbos bracha, a Shabbos candle, or a Chanukah candle? So you could think Chanukah, because Shabbos is 52 times a year. Chanukah is once a year, or sometimes twice, if it's two Shabbos Chanukas. And the Rambam Paskins know that mitzvahs ner Chanukah is of Pesum and Nisa. The reason for it is to publicize the miracle. And ner Shabbos is for Shalom Bayis. And Shalom Bayis is greater than everything. To the extent that God said, erase my name to preserve the harmony within the house, Shalom Bayis. The law of Satan. You use God's name, you put it in her mouth, and it dissolves, which is a big yisur, in order to preserve the marriage. God couldn't find another way to do it. This is what we learned. So the bottom line is, and this is what I was discussing, this is applied Chassidus, obviously based on halacha, but going further, a marriage is the most sacred thing possible. If Rahman al-Islam, those rare instances, it does happen, an infidelity, an unfaithfulness, or an accusation, you have to do everything possible to correct. Now, obviously, if one party doesn't want, or continues to be unfaithful, or continues to lie, so there you got yourself the crime. But if a mistake happened, I say mistake, a crime happened, not a mistake. You don't have to go dig up and bring all the proofs and so on. You do whatever it takes to sit them down and figure out how to build their lives. Is it difficult to overcome? Yes, we discussed that in the last episode, because it's a betrayal of trust. How do you rebuild trust? But even if it's a woman, the husband is encouraged not to believe. The husband is encouraged to figure out how to work it out, and not necessarily to accept that it happened. So you have a lot of conditions and a lot of circumstances. And again, I advise everyone, number one, to go to a Rav if there's anything like this comes up. Number two, and more importantly, is to go to a therapist or to go to a Rav and a Mashpia. You could sit down and figure out how to preserve a marriage, especially with children, even not children. Again, people are akshanim and they decide they want to do whatever they want to do. They fall in love with someone else, quote unquote. That's exactly what the Shulchan Aruch and the Halach is trying to avoid. So if we understood the sanctity and we understood the value of soulmates, two people who stood under a chuppah, and don't take it for granted, that's the bottom line. So again, I specifically avoided getting into these details because it's not the place of this MyLife Chassidus Applied. And you could definitely check with the Rabbanim and check with those that are authorities. And here also, I also want to qualify and say nothing said here has halachic psak. I'm not pasking shaylos in this forum. This is a discussion of relationships, of dealing with personal issues, psychological, emotional issues based on Torah and Chassidus. And issues that are black and white halacha, or even not black and white, that need Rabbanish intervention and Rabbanim to paskin. There's a different form. This is not the form. Just saying that, I said it a number of times. I say it in almost every episode that comes to things they have to go to the right parties. That doesn't mean we have not a lot to talk about. And as I said, I would want to focus here is on the sanctity of marriage and to do whatever it takes to keep husband and wife together in a loving way. And yes, you could dig deeper, and I've seen it with my own eyes, couples who there was accusations of unfaithfulness and there was admissions of it and so on, who dug deeper in their love, and not dug deeper to find more schmutz, dug deeper in their love and found what Moshe Rabbeinu was found on Har Sinai and Yom Kippur, Salachti Kidvarecha, with Hashem, that he was able to find a deeper connection like that. So on this Lag B'Yom, I want to conclude again with the Peikad HaKodesh, the theme of bridging schisms, which is the power of Rashbi. He was able to absolve din, severities of all people, including the severities of challenges in marriage, challenges in having children, challenges with our children, the different ideas we discussed here. And ultimately, like the Rebbe concludes in that Sikh Lag B'Yom Tov Shemem, our relationship with God is the same. That same medrash the Rebbe uses, that when we in some way get estranged from God, we can say that we want God to be our property. That God, like could happen there with the husband and wife, where he said, take something that's valuable. So he didn't take the Eibishter. That even after they've gone through whatever they've gone through, 10 years, 1,000 years of Golus and so on, and there's been problems, we still take God, we take him home to us. And we say, this is our chayfetz, this is our property. And God is happy to hear that. And then that's Peikad HaKodesh and opens up the channels of bringing the Gula Amitis V'Ashlema. You've been listening to MyLife, Chassidus Applied, episode 17. And you can write questions into MyLife, meaningfullife.com/MyLifeLive. Until next Sunday, 8 to 9, I bid you all a very good week.